how come is that? Like, when I notice, like, when I do a storytelling post, I always get a huge engagement. Like, people seem to love it, and the less CTA I put on the bottom, the more engagement I get.
Yeah.
See, like,
Yep. Yep.
when you don't ask people, like, it's more likely they engage. Like, how come? Like, what happens in people's minds? Like, why is it so powerful?
Well, gosh, I mean, you covered a lot with that overview, I would say,
Mm,
and maybe I'll start with the end first. Like, you're totally right. The stronger the call to action, the less likely you are to have engagement. Right?
mhm.
Social media, just in general, even whether it's subconscious, I think people don't like to be sold to. In general, they like to be entertained. That's what the emotional response is about. Even and you can be entertained in a negative fashion sometimes, right? I mean, go to go to the Twitter comments, right, if you want some negative entertainment. But um, you know, this is pretty secondhand. I grasped the value of storytelling early on, and partially I had an affinity towards it, so I didn't do a lot of study, but there's a book out there called Storyworthy by Matthew Dix, which I always refer to people. There you go. That's good.
This one, strongly
um,
recommend. I haven't finished this one, but the part that I've read, I already loved.
yeah, well, it's funny. I think within about the first third of it, you can get most of what you need out of that book if anybody cares. But you know, it's a real powerful selling of the value of stories in that book, and I think like the short version is people are wired for story. Before we had written form, information was passed through stories verbally, right? So the whatever our genetics predispose us to be interested in stories, retain information better when you can connect it to something, especially something that had an emotional response. You probably remember the hottest, you know, habanero pepper you ever ate or something like that, because there was some emotion. There was some like reaction to it and all that sort of thing. So
Mhm,
um,
mhm.
anyway, uh, so I think I firmly believe that we are hardwired to have, to respond to stories. And then I think actually executing the storytelling piece isn't very hard, but I will concede that I struggled early on big time to have like I didn't actually know what a story was. I mean, you kind of hear from your creative writing days in school, beginning, middle, and an end, and maybe you went so far as protagonists, antagonists, and the arc of a theme or whatever. I don't know, all the things that are out there. But I knew I didn't want to be writing graphic novels on my Facebook post. There wasn't room for that, so I had to come up with a framework that short circuited all that. And honestly, I just swiped Russell Brunson's Epiphany Bridge framework, kind of pared it back a little bit so that it was easier for me to use. And I might have been a little skeptical in some ways at first. Maybe it's just skeptical that I could pull it off. But I kind of felt like the Epiphany Bridge framework was right, because the way they talk about it in the Expert Secrets book um, just really connected with me. And I forget exactly how they described it, but what I recall when I think about it now is that there is an arc, and there's a roller coaster that a story takes you on. It's a little bit of context to start, to let you know where you are in the story and why you might care. But from there, and I can walk through this mentally because I've done it so many times, right? So it's background, then it's a desire that the character had, something that they wanted, but there was also a wall that was preventing them from getting it. So right there, you've got a little context, which is neutral, a desire that kind of starts to lift people up, like, oh yeah, cool, I want that, or I can see that. And then there's a wall that takes you down, like, oh, I got a hurdle to overcome. And then you have an epiphany, which is kind of one of the high points of the story, like, oh, here's how I'm going to solve it. Then you come back to planning, which I'd say is sort of neutral. Then they do a conflict, which brings you back to the bottom, like, oh, my epiphany, I can't do this
Mm.
for some reason. How am I going to overcome it? And then you end up somehow, the resolution of your story is that there is a transformation or some kind of achievement that the main character has made in the story. And so I started writing that way a little bit, and it seemed like it was okay, but it was also hard for me. I had to like I had to have that framework on my page every time I wrote, and I'd kind of fill in the blanks as I went. But the thing that really put me over the edge was I've got two young daughters. And when I started doing this, I started just making up bedtime stories for them, and I would follow that trajectory. And they were the dumbest stories, especially at first. They were
Mhm.
mindless, kind of cartoony thinking. And I was kind of almost 1 to 3 sentences each step of the Epiphany Bridge
Mhm.
framework. And
This is how you practice the thing,
yeah,
the
at
structure. Yeah.
bedtime every night, I was just doing it orally, and they loved them. Like they always loved the story. Some were obviously better than others, but as long as I hit those spots and had the arc, they were always engaged. And by the end, they were like, "Oh, it was amazing. It was true. That was a big transformation for me. Um, was like
Mhm.
how well that worked. Because I'd be like, as I'm telling the story, I'm like, this is pretty dumb. I don't think it's going to be good. And the response was always way more
Mhm.
positive than I thought it would be. And so,
Okay. Okay.
I learned how to do it that way. I learned how to do it succinctly, and I applied it then to the marketing writing, and it just felt like it really worked for people.
Mhm.
People come to your page and they see a post and they're like, at the very least, even if you have calls to action, they're like, I want to know what he has to say because it's going to be at least somewhat interesting. And that's honestly, that's pretty much my objective. You know, it's
That's
not a
the
real high
reward.
bar.
Yeah, that's the reward. Okay, so let me ask you a question that most people who listen to us would ask you, like, okay, talking about stories, but how the hell am I supposed to find those stories? Okay,
Yeah.
that's what everybody has in mind, like especially beginners. And I loved when you said on one of your trainings that I assisted, you said our stories, we should not create them, we should find them, because we
Yeah.
don't realize that we have many stories going on, and people are always there telling me, hey, on what am I supposed to share, like, my life is boring, there's not much happening. So explain, please,
Sure.
give hope to people, show them hope.
Yeah. I mean, it is a hopeful message. And coincidentally, I would say that a big chunk of my thinking on this also came from that Storyworthy book. Um, a couple ideas. I already had this idea going before him, but he mentions, I forget if he uses the phrase, but I call it a spark file now. I feel like Chris Donnelly might have invented that phrase, but Matthew Dix uses a spreadsheet. He keeps little notes on events during his day. At the end of the day, he writes down things that happened in his life, and whether he uses them all is probably not, but he can always go back and refer to the stories. I do mine in a Google Doc. I've got like 98 pages of notes these days of
Mhm.
whenever I sit down, I'm not starting with a blank page. um, and maybe I'll come back to that, because really we'll go to the story part first. But the idea is that you capture your ideas somewhere so that you don't forget them, so that you're not
Yeah,
starting with a blank screen whenever you sit down to write. I think that's a
exactly.
hugely important piece. And then on the story part, and again, this came from Storyworthy book, where I really got it, which is just what Alan said. Like, you don't you don't want to sit down and try to manufacture some epic, Star Wars, or great novel. It's nothing like that, because that will be hard. That will take time.
Hmm.
You can't do that every day. And so instead of creating stories, you spot them. You learn to become a story spotter.
Spotter,
Um,
yeah. I'm not right.
and when I was teaching this through a few of my offers, and even I think, I repeat it whenever it seems appropriate. Like, I have intentionally come up with the dumbest topic I could think of and then written a marketing post around it, just to show people that it's possible and it can still be an interesting story. Two of my best examples that you can find, they're a little old now, but they're on my timeline from 2021. One is Lessons from an Electric Toothbrush, which is basically my dental hygienist convincing me that I needed an electric toothbrush. And he basically had me sold in about 90 seconds. At age 50, I had never used an electric toothbrush, and he convinced me in no time. And there's a pretty interesting story in there as far as I'm concerned. And it's not War and Peace, and it's not like the greatest marketing post you've ever seen, but it's a pretty interesting story out of something that, if you weren't if you hadn't trained yourself to spot them, you might not have noticed it. And the more you look for these things, the
Exactly.
more you can turn them into a marketing message. That one was pretty easy because he
Hmm.
sold me a toothbrush. Not, he didn't get anything from it. He wasn't actually selling the toothbrush.
Hmm.
He was he was just he just was he was selling the idea, and I bought it. The other one I did was, I can't remember the title of it, but it's something about me walking face first into a spider web. And that one was me trying to teach people that you can do marketing posts on the mundane things in your life, as long as you train yourself to come in that mindset.
Hmm. Yeah, story spotter. Exactly.
Yeah.
We just need to start notice what's
Yep.
happening
So
around us.
notice the little things.
Mhm.
I mean, again, I did one. I might have been through 6FA. I can't remember, but I'm just like, you can make a story out of anything. One of the things that I also came up with, and I think this one was titled something like human garbage disposal. So I've got 5 kids. For the past 20 years, I have been picking up their scraps, and instead of throwing them away, eating most of them. And so I wrote a story around that. And to me, I usually go for kind of funny, looking for odd things that might be entertaining. And again, you get a little laugh, you can get a little emotional connection there. So,
Mhm.
yeah, so that's a long answer around spotting stories.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So it's just a matter of noticing them, and yeah, once again, big emphasis on the spark file, like you said. Every time the idea come, make sure, guys, you write it down, because it just goes away out of your head like within a few
Yeah.
minutes.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, if there's any single thing that's gonna make a difference in the ease of writing, that's it. Not starting from blank screen. I cannot overemphasize the the value of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Colleen is asking you, where can we find you on Facebook? You mean, Colleen, right? So yeah, just Todd Foster. Simple. You type the name, or I'll send you the link, direct link, if
Yeah,
you
I
want.
just put the link in there.
Yeah, yeah, probably the best one. Okay, okay, cool, Todd. So if we should like answer the question of this lab, of this training that I announced, like, how to create a content that sells, what does it come down to?
Whew, yeah, it's a good question. If you think about a single post, we've already touched on most of this. Um, you need to elicit an emotional response, and you need the reader to take an action. Those are the two things that need to happen in your post. They
In one
it's
action.
a, it's a marketing post.
Mhm.
You're doing marketing, so you need to have a story. You need to make the story connect in a way that makes sense to solve a problem. I talk about shifting beliefs a lot. Like that's really the number one objective that I have for marketing posts.
Mhm.
It really can encompass everything. The three objectives that I usually refer to are shifting the reader's beliefs, establishing your own authority, and building know, like, and trust. And shifting beliefs can actually cover those other two. You can shift the belief from not knowing you're an authority to then believing you're an authority. And you can build know, like, and trust by same thing. You're shifting the belief from
Mhm.
I don't know this person very well to now I do, and I think they're awesome.
Mhm.
So it's the emotional response, it's the kind of shifting beliefs objective, and then it's directing the reader to take an action, which you don't do on every post necessarily. You're not saying buy my thing every month or
Mhm.
every post.
Mhm.
But you can test that for yourself. I mean, I don't do that, but there have been times where I've gone weeks or months even of like every post has a call to action.
Mhm.
And so it's something to test. But the last thing I'll say is that's kind of post specific, and then there's this whole other world of like content strategy where ideally, and I would say start with the post specific stuff. Get good at just writing a story and telling a marketing message. And then the next step is to have a strategy of some kind that takes the reader on a journey, take your audience on a journey that isn't just one thing one day, one thing another day, and you're just doing random stuff. In
Mhm.
the end, if you have an offer that you are trying to sell to people, work backwards from the beliefs that they need to have in order to make buying that
The buying
make sense
decision.
to them, right? So pick the beliefs. If I'm not very good at making up examples on the fly, but if you're selling a organic sales and marketing program, beliefs are that you need people to have, or that organic social media marketing it works. That marketing posts is a way to go about doing things, that I got to have conversations with people in Messenger, whatever. You need to know what the core beliefs are of your offer to then work backwards to creating a sequence of content that delivers the outcome you want. And you can do this 1,000 different ways. And this is where it gets a little tactical, and, certain people believe certain things. I don't think there's one right way to do it. I think as long as you're doing stuff on purpose and taking your audience on a journey, you'll have some success. I use that Epiphany Bridge formula to talk about the roller coaster. I think you kind of want the same thing with the sequence of posts, like some of them can be hardcore belief shifting. Some of them can be controversial. Some of them can be soft, like look at my cute kids and buy my thing, whatever but it moves people around a little bit. So that you're not just bored. Honestly, repetition of the same thing gets boring. Even if you were the most awesome authority on something, if you just wrote a variation of the same message every day, people would tire of it eventually. And so you gotta keep it fresh.
So, we're still talking about the storytelling, but just to remind, that's just one type of a post amongst many others, right? So it's once we put it into the rotation and into the mix with others, sure, then it becomes even more effective. But you are so right to say that every post, every type of a content should be belief shifted in some way. And that's what I apply on my stories. Same thing. I mean, a story feature on the phone, like we should always be taking people somewhere in
right.
what we're saying. Yeah, definitely true.
Yeah, and I guess I'll even add, I mean, this might be in the weeds, but every post, I think you kind of where Alan's going here is every post doesn't have to be a 400 word, story, pitch, whatever. I tend to do more of those than not, and I believe in them. But there's a time and a place for the super short form posts, some mid form, some straight offers, some, whatever. Like you can do all that stuff. And my main thing is do it on purpose. Have a plan, work backwards from your destination. Like I'm going to launch this. Alan, had a live planned for today. He talked to me, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago. He had a plan. He worked towards it. He set it up. He got you guys on this because he created some interest in it. He didn't just do the same thing over and over, but created an interesting journey for people to end up on this live.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Exactly. There's planning that comes into play. Always thinking like, how does this specific piece of a content fits in the series of other pieces of content? How does it work together? What kind of idea people can get about us?
Yeah. And it's not easy. I again, it's one of those skills you got to develop. So don't beat yourself up over any of this stuff. Honestly, the best thing you can do is practice, get reps. Obviously I'm partial to getting feedback, as Alan knows. It's the best way to learn. But yeah, it takes practice for sure.
Sure. Lifestyle posts are not to be underestimated. They get 100%. A lot of engagement. Yeah. Like even big authorities, you see them posting always like about families. Like I don't do many of those because the truth is like the family has to agree on this. Like I noticed that your family, your girls, because you have 5 kids, right, Todd? So it looks like they all agree on this, but my daughter doesn't always feel like, Dad, what picture, what for, who's gonna see that? See, like I sometimes have to push her. So this is why I don't share many personal pics. But the truth is, it's powerful.
Very appropriate. I called my youngest daughter my number one engagement hack. She's a cute kid, and everybody, there's like nobody's afraid to comment or like a post like that. It's
Uh-huh.
it does. You're not. They're not worried about me jumping in their DMs and trying to sell them something
Mhm, mhm,
when you
mhm,
just kind of
mhm,
do a family photo. But to be fair too, like the whole point of that lifestyle kind of thing is to build that know, like, and trust, to know that you're a real person who has,
mhm.
whatever, however you want to express your values. And you definitely don't have to include, wife and kids kind of thing. Like it could be more about like your fitness regime, the way you cook and eat, whatever other hobbies, music, if that's something, whatever your non sales and marketing things are. I think people can be interested in and can help with the emotional connection, right? Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
They need to have that window into our life. So this is why we need to share that. Yeah, content is a huge piece. It's a big piece of my own program that I've launched. That is publicly launched. But the only frustration for me is that most of the people that I get into my program, like they come to me with 300 people on their friends list. So we need to focus so much on that audience growth first in order to even start talking about content. And I would love to, dive into that part, but it's just wouldn't be making sense to be teaching them content when they have 300 people on their friends list. See, but I'll get to that for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, I mean, I think you just touched on the point, of different version of the point I was making before. Like this whole business involves some sequences. You can't run before you walk in anything.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
so I think that's a good point to recognize for you, for your clients as well. But the good news is people can still write with a small audience, and it can be lower pressure. They can document
practice.
their
Mhm,
journey as they
sure.
go. Um,
That is true.
and honestly, I think those stories are really powerful for people. If you've got 12 months of showing up pretty consistently on your timeline, y- you know people who have been watching you for that time will see your growth, and you will end up ahead of those people, and eventually you might be able to offer them something that they'd like to learn. And I think a lot of people also love learning from, not they don't you don't want to learn from somebody who's up here, who's going to cost $1,000 an hour or whatever it is.
Mhm,
A lot of times people want to learn from the people who were just ahead of them, and either it's still
exactly.
fresh in their mind and they know what
Because
it's
it's
like to be.
relatable. It's
Yeah,
relatable to them. Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely. Sure, sure. Sure, sure. Yeah, that's what I keep repeating. Like, sometimes uh, people get caught up with this idea, like, who the hell is going to listen to me? Who am I? See,
Mm.
while there are so many skilled people out there, but, one thing to realize is that people are tired of experts. Like, experts are all over the place. Like, YouTube is full of them, and, Google is full of them. And like people cannot relate to someone like Russell Brunson. It's just way too far away. They will relate to someone who was in their spot like only a few weeks or months ago.
Yeah, exactly. You
Over
being an
20.
expert doesn't necessarily help me.
Yeah. Exactly. Cool. Guys, if you have any questions here, like I see that we have a lot of people here, but I don't see many questions. I even see some copywriters here. TC, hi TC. I know that you do copywriting. Uh, okay, we answered that one. Todd, anything specific that we're forgetting on this live that you would like to mention in terms of a content creation? Probably the structure that we haven't touched on. The headline, hooks, stories,
Yeah,
CTAs. Kind of.
I can do that. Yeah. I
Sure,
mean,
sure.
this couldn't be simpler. Similar to that story framework. I'm a big frameworks guy. I think my data and analytics thing. I thrive on logic, despite kind of enjoying the creative aspects of writing.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't like ever starting from a blank page. So I have a framework for post writing that I'm pretty religious about, in the story piece slots in there. Um, but it's just 4 steps, and I pretty sure I adapted this from Ben Settle's uh, sales page format, or maybe it was an
Mhm.
email format that he had. But it's just very simple, nothing crazy to it. But it's how I always start. It's You start with a headline, you
Mhm.
have a hook that's like a way to engage people to read more about what you've written.
Yeah.
It's a connector to the story. The story is the third element. And then the last part is your closing section, which is usually, with a call to action. So it's headline, hook, story, close.
Close.
And that's the framework that I use. Headlines and hooks are, in art, people actually legitimately get paid big bucks to just do those things. And then the story piece is also, there's plenty of art and craft you can work on in there. And same with call to action. Like there's ways. The one thing I'll say about call to action that I think people also struggle with often is, how do I do this in a way that isn't kind of pushy or annoying or whatever. And so a lot of people go really soft. There's a lot of like, hey, if you're interested, maybe sometime think about, hitting me up or whatever. It's like, it's often very softly worded, and I can make fun of that because I did the exact same thing for a long time. But I think in the end, if you get of the mindset that you have a solution to a problem that you believe in, and that matters. You have to believe in the thing you're selling. You have to know what problem you're solving. But if you have that belief, then all you're doing is inviting those who are interested to join you. And it's that simple. So you can dress that up or dress it down however you want. But, I like calls to action that are, I use the word assertive, and I think of that as different than pushy. It's like, I have this thing that will help you solve a problem. If you're interested, check it out here, message me, whatever whatever it is you want people to do. Just like, we have this thing, it works, if it's something that interests you, you know where to find us, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And even algorithm wise, I've personally noticed that the more you put in there, like comment this or reach out below, like Facebook seems to like reduce the reach of this type of a post. Have you noticed as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that this is an area where I can be a little controversial. I don't think everybody agrees with me. And the funny thing is, I'm going to say this and tell you that I don't always do what I'm about to say, but I had really good success with clear and strong calls to action when I was running my own offers pretty hardcore. The engagement was terrible, and the volume of sales was excellent for me. Very few people engaged, but those who did were actually like trying to buy something. And that was awesome. I thought that was, that's what you want. I don't need a bunch of likes without the follow through of the sale in some cases. That being said, you're 100% correct. And I feel like what I just described works best when you are on a very intentional campaign that has a clear ending. If you're talking about an evergreen thing and you just always put kind of a similar call to action post after post after post, forget it. That won't work. And I'm not always in campaign mode, so I don't always put those strong calls to actions in there. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, love to hear you say that. See, like most people don't realize it. This is a goal, what you just said. Also in connection with the engagement, because people, suffer with that. Like, I didn't get any likes, any comments without realizing that there are actually a bunch of people who saw and consumed that content than what shows in likes and comments. And you can tell like on timelines of successful marketers who a lot of times get 5 likes, 10 comments, like nothing special, but still they're making like over 10, 15K per month. So engagement is, it's a trap. Yeah. Not to follow.
Yeah. And it's a tough one because especially when you're starting out, and to your point, Alan, you're building an audience up from 300 people. Like you kind of do need some engagement, right? You need to again, it's crawling before you walk kind of thing. You gotta put some info out there and get people to kind of know who you are and know what you're doing and kind of where you're trying to go yourself.
Absolutely. Todd, excellent. So the 10 comments means hundreds of the content. Like that's what Danny says. Yeah, you're right. And with the professional profiles, we can get that information. They tell us that thing now. See the impressions, right? That's how they call it, the impressions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see it on Reels as well. Like we literally can tell, how many people Well, we will not know if they whether or not they really read all through the post, but at least we know that they were exposed to it, and that's kind of the purpose of the content that we're posting. So I have one compliment here for you.
Yeah, I saw that. Thanks, Lawrence.
Okay, cool, cool. Guys, if you don't have any more questions coming, we kind of covered what we wanted to cover because this topic is so big that I believe I could keep here, Todd, for 3 hours and we would still have some things to talk about. I'm pretty passionate about it as well. So, Todd, I wanted to thank you for being here today for us, for providing all this value to my people. And I would like to thank you, people, my people, to for showing so many here. Thanks for being here. Reach out if you want more details. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
Yeah, two things. To Lawrence's comment, this can kind of be the summary. I've already beat the dead horse a little bit, but I appreciate it. Um, whatever whatever expertise you perceive, I feel like I've earned by practicing, and that's what I would encourage everyone to do, whether it's like I said, copy or building offers or selling, whatever it is that you really want to get good at. Invest the time, recognize that it will take some time despite what some of the hype out there tells you, and just get good at the game and things will fall into place. That's my belief. And then the last thing I'll say is, Alan, thanks for the invitation. It's been a pleasure watching like you grow. You've come just so far in every aspect. Content is just one of the components. But your group here is in good hands with where you're taking them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Happy to hear that. Um, those of you who feel like your content is not good enough, that you will never learn how to write, how to type, post the right type of a content, just to remind you guys, like, English is not even my first language. To tell you the truth, it's not even my second language, it's my third, and it didn't stop me from just posting what I'm posting or whatever you think about it. So you guys who are born English speaking people, you are 10 steps ahead of me, so there's
No
really
excuses.
nothing that yeah, no excuse. That's the point of what I was trying to say. Okay, guys. Thank you for everyone. Thanks everyone for being here. Thank you, Todd. This is a great session for Saturday. Thanks for showing up live. So many really pleasant, really nice experience. Thanks, Todd. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening and the rest of the weekend.
Thanks all.
Cheers.